Welcome, everybody. It is Business Monday here at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Thank our friends over at Deepwater Wind. I'm Josh Fenton. This is the Money Man, Gary Sass. Lots going on in business, high finance, international trade, politics, road building. We've got it all. Let's start with state. Little news coming out late last week. State's got in a booming economy. Record growth, more people working than ever before. We've still got a deficit.
Well, that's what happens when you adopt probably one of the worst budgets that we can remember. It's interesting, when the governor submitted her budget originally, the governor was projecting an $87 million deficit in the next fiscal year, which starts July of 2019, which wasn't bad. It was about 2% deficit. And all of a sudden, a few months later, the deficit is projected to be almost 160 million.
Right.
And it becomes an issue. It's a 4% deficit. And so you sit back and ask your question, why in this good economy did this happen? And a lot of it just was fiscal irresponsibility. I don't know any other way to describe it. To give you some examples, employee raises, weren't originally budgeted. That added to a structural deficit.
Right.
Use of one-time revenue, using the fiscal 18 surplus of about $30 million. Revenues continuing to grow, faster. Expenditures continue to grow faster than revenues. And so you see a whole number of conscious decisions made that increased the deficit. It doubled the deficit from what the governor was originally projecting. And that should never happen in good economic times.
And is that just straight out, is some of it election year spending? In other words, I don't want to be fiscally responsible while I'm running for re-election because I don't want to make cuts or tweak the budget during the operational year because that interest group or that union might get upset with me?
Well, there's always a political calculus in an even-numbered year budget. So, certainly. But the fact of the matter is, even with a political calculus, when you submit a budget and you project a 2% deficit in the subsequent year, and that deficit turns out to be 4%, that should never happen.
Oh, by the way, 4%, and what are we, a month and a half, 2 months into the new fiscal year?
Yeah, but that's 4% for the next fiscal year.
That's what I'm saying, but it's only...
Yeah, and there's probably a deficit, in this budget. So I think it's a classic case of we've had structural budget deficits for at least a decade, probably 2 decades. They fluctuate. They reduce themselves when the economy gets better. When the economy is tough, they increase. And now we have a structural deficit doubling above the original forecast in a good economic time. So then you have to go back and say, well, why? And the factors that I mentioned, not budgeting for employee pay increases, you're using one-time revenue, the scoops, using a surplus to balance the budget, not recognizing the fact that you can't continue to live in a situation where spending grows by 3.5%, revenues grow by less than 2%. That's known. Those were decisions made that people said, we'll worry about it. I think they said, we'll worry about it after the election. Well, the policy consequences are very significant because we need to invest in urban schools. We need to invest in certain social programs. If we're going to continue to expand Medicaid, not reform it and cut it. We always have to be looking at our tax strategy and tax policy. And when the first thing you have to do is remove a 4% deficit, then you really never have the discussion of how you make things better and how you improve things. You're just kind of paddling and doing your dog paddle on the lake.
So there's 8 candidates for governor, and we get press releases and announcements from each one of them certainly on a weekly, if not on a daily basis. None of them are talking about structural deficits, and none of them are talking about budget deficits. Why not? Why aren't Republicans hammering Governor Raimondo on that issue? Isn't that the core to the differences of the two parties?
Well, no, I think both parties, we've been in the state long enough. I've worked with fiscally responsible members of both parties.
Yeah.
Both as members of the legislature and in the governor's office. Bruce Sutter was a fiscally responsible governor. Matty Smith, the old speaker, was a very conservative guy, physically. So it's not necessarily a partisan thing. In state government, you don't have to be a Democrat or Republican to want to balance the budget. Now, that you may have different ways, approaches to balance the budget, and one side may increase taxes, may not want to cut spending, one may focus more on the spending side, but that doesn't matter. The fiscal policy should be a responsible, balanced budget. And why isn't that more of the debate? I don't know. I would give Pat Morgan credit. When she was active in the budget debates and minority leader, she put out some strong statements. The Republicans Party was very critical of this year's budget in their statements. They pointed out some of the shortcomings. Now, why isn't it following into the campaign? I don't know.
Not sexy? Is it just not a sexy issue?
Well, it can become a sexy issue after September 12th.
Yeah.
When there's the person who submitted the budget, is in effect the chief executive officer of the state, and we're facing this kind of fiscal issue, then that might be the appropriate time to debate it. The other thing you need to be very careful about, we're talking about a projection, we're talking about a forecast. The economy can take off just like gangbusters, and this deficit can be solved by or reduced and minimized by what happens to the economy.
But can you, we have record revenue on hotel taxes. We have record employment. We have, most of the indicators are performing and performing at all-time highs. At some point, you've got to say, and Mike DeBiase was on here one day, the director of administration for the Raimondo administration, said it straight out. We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem.
Right, and so what is this administration, what is the legislature doing about the spending problem? When you look at these results and you look at the forecast to date, you say they're doing the wrong things, not bringing this under control. But we'll see. The economy may get better and it may improve, but it's got us in a kind of a fiscal limbo or fiscal purgatory. We're not going to hell. It could certainly be managed, but you can't get to heaven. You can't get the right decisions made to move the state forward because you're always backpedaling against this irritants, this fiscal irritants. And it shows a lack of seriousness on the part of state government not wanting to get it under control. And for the third time, I repeat myself, how can it possibly double from the original forecast unless you just totally disregard fiscal matters?
Let's go down to Washington, D.C. The details are sketchy. There's news that the U.S. is close to a trade agreement. Do not call it NAFTA. The president says it's not NAFTA. It's a new trade agreement with Mexico. As of right now, Canada is not a part of it. The stock market liked it. Last checked in about an hour ago, the market was up 250 and liked the idea of getting out of this trade wars and into a substantial structure for trade moving forward. Your thoughts, and without nobody's seen the details yet.
Well, anytime we can open up, borders and have free trade in this hemisphere, it's good. So, if Mexico is satisfied with it, if we've made some modifications to NAFTA to protect some of the jobs that we did lose. NAFTA was a funny thing. NAFTA was a good thing. I support NAFTA, I still do. But what
you and your friend Bill Clinton, two Southerners working together on
Southerners are free traders. That's why the South is doing well. But the point being, what we underestimated, were there are pockets where NAFTA would have an adverse impact on individuals and people. So there might be a town in Ohio that had a factory.
Absolutely.
And had 500 jobs in that factory, and they were hurt. They were hurt.
Well, it must have been Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin, because those are the swing states that Trump pounded away on and beat Hillary Clinton.
So so it needed to be fixed because there was some impact on jobs and that we didn't anticipate. Overall, it's been pretty good. It's important that Canada be involved with this. Last time I looked, they were on our borders, too. And the president personalizing his debate with the Prime Minister of Canada is not a very seemly thing. But no, the trade agreement with Mexico, I think it's potential is very positive, but don't know the details.
Yeah, I guess during this morning's press conference, the president of Mexico was on with reporters simultaneous to the president via conference call. So, you know, a lot of indications that that's on its way to some cleanup. Let's talk about just straight up governing. Little more than a week ago, DOT announced major rehab or began the process. They'd actually announced it about 2 weeks earlier, but it began the process of improvements to 195 and specifically the Gano Street exit. The Gano Street exit is really, if you're coming in from the East Bay, one of only 2 exits while you're on 195 to enter the city of Providence. And not a lot of public education, a lot of chaos once the process began. People stuck in traffic from their 30-minute commutes were now 2-hour commutes. I was driving down to Newport Friday morning at 10:30, and the traffic going into the city was still backed up 2-3 miles beyond Seekonk. Pretty much record backups. Over the weekend, DOT reversed itself to some degree after a lot of controversies and a lot of awkward moments with the governor's office to make some changes, open up another lane to try and eliminate or reduce the amount of traffic congestion. How can government be so inept in 2018 to not be able to plan out a construction project on an exit?
Well, you know, it's easy to sit here and have hindsight and second guess. What DOT did was really to reduce capacity by 40%. And they had computer models, so the first answer is that the computer models weren't very good. There's also, you have to look back at the culture and the history of agencies. DOT has never had the reputation of being a very consumer-friendly agency.
Really, you think so?
I don't think so. I know, I think, when I worked in state government, I used to think of DOT as the iron triangle. They were the road builders in one apex, they were the unions in the others, and then there were the people that worked at DOT. And,
right.
And everything was,
they all went to work for one another. They all,
if you thought
100%.
If you thought about convenience, that was the culture. Now, we're trying to break that culture, and there've been certainly the opening of the highway and the education that was done there was very good. So they just, they blew it. They made a mistake. I give DOT, credit for admitting the mistake and trying to correct it. It goes beyond comprehension why you think you can close 40% of your capacity and not create some log jams. But
before schools go back to and before the colleges
they're working,
come in.
They're working to create it. Some of the projects are not coordinated with other projects. But I think the governor is setting the wrong tone. When I asked about it, the governor said she wasn't a traffic engineer.
Right. Not my problem. I'm not a traffic engineer.
And then when we had UHIP and people couldn't get their food stamps or their medical payments, I guess her excuse then was, I'm not a social worker.
Right.
I'm more an eligibility technician.
Right.
Well, the governor is a traffic engineer. Governor is a social worker, certainly responsible for those people. And the fundamental of government is to focus on stewardship, of running a consumer-friendly government. Every business in this country and the world right now, recognizes that if you're not customer-friendly, you're going to go out of business. And what we teach up at Bryan of idea design thinking, is really focused on having the business as responsive as it can be to the customer. And without getting into the weeds, what's happening in this administration, when you look at UHIP, when you look at the episode, with the Washington, bridge, when you look at lines at DMV, is that there seems to be a disconnect between the people at the very top level who should have a culture of being customer friendly, of making life as convenient as they can for the people the state has to provide services to, and not necessarily focusing their energy on just corporate welfare, attracting XYZ company. We'd be better off attracting people from Barrington or from the East Bay and say it's not going to take you an hour and a half to get to work, which has a cost, by the way. There's no free lunch.
Oh, absolutely. Right.
And so I think you raised a really good question, because I think there's a broader issue of how does this administration view their responsibility to provide good quality.
But isn't
basic
there just,
service.
I mean, first of all, there is an analysis and there is technology to be able to make the analysis. Second of all, there is something called common sense. When the first press release came, I want to say the beginning of August, that said, Gano Street exit is going to be closed. Every single person in this office looked at each other and said, oh, that's going to be a disaster. Then you read further on that it's going to happen for 18 months. Disaster, catastrophic disaster. Plus, you're running for re-election. Do you really want to offend everyone on half the state during your re-election process? There's only 2 roads in Rhode Island. There's 95 and there's 195. Okay, you close down one of them, it's going to have an impact on everybody trying to go to work, trying to pick up their kids, trying to drop them off, trying to go to soccer practice, etc.
Well, I had an appointment before I came here in Wayland Square, and I come in from East Greenwich. So I got off, at the mall, and I went up Memorial Drive.
Did you really?
And it took me 5 minutes longer to get there. So for the public education support, people make mistakes. The computer program was a mistake. Certainly the engineers, traffic engineers at DOT, didn't take their computer models and actually, walk it through and then look at what the contingencies, might be. You're right, there wasn't a good public education program. All that said.
And by the way, all this during August when about 10 to 15% of the workforce is on some level of vacation.
Yeah, but so there's some mistakes were made. They're in the process now of correcting those mistakes. And I'm sure things will get better. But
everybody who gets stuck in any traffic jam coming in from 195 for the next few months will blame Governor Raimondo and Rhode Island DOT fairly or unfairly because of this blunder.
Well, you have to also think about programming your work out. And everywhere you travel in this state right now, there's construction. Now, we're all for good infrastructure. We're all for having good roads. We pay a lot to have good roads. But in planning out your work, you have to recognize that there are interconnections between this road system. And then I don't know what they're thinking about it.
Alvini was on the radio today and said, listen, we're trying to make up for 30 years of behind projects. Okay, but you don't need to do them all in one summer in an election year. Let's jump over. Jump over to downtown Providence.
Jump over the bridge.
Tallest building in downtown Providence has been vacant for 5 going on 6 years. One Financial Plaza, the old Hospital Trust Tower, just sold for about $12–13 million less than it sold in 2007. Low 50s million dollars it sold in 2007 for $68 million. Go over behind Superman, Citizens Tower, Citizens Plaza is the name of it. That building, which is Citizens corporate headquarters, is on the auction blocks. And if we go up Westminster Street to 380, full of government, federal government operations, long-term leases through the General Services Administration. That building went into receivership. Joe Paolino bought it for a little less than $9 million. It had sold most recently in 2007 or 8 for $22 million. Is this, in this booming economy, with new buildings being built in downtown Providence, a little bit of a worry indicator that your commercial real estate infrastructure, the tallest, most valuable buildings in this core of the city, are all losing value? This is not happening in New York City or Boston, Massachusetts, or Worcester, Massachusetts at the same time. Those buildings are flying up in value.
Well, we've gone.
That's a yes or no? No,
no,
I kid.
Maybe. We've been going through change, for decades. You go downtown, and the economy has changed.
Right.
The banks are no longer headquartered here. Other companies are not headquartered here. The nature of work has changed.
Right.
People can work in Nevada and provide services here. So the nature of work has changed. And when the nature of work changes, then the infrastructure to support the work, is affected by it. And it's the one thing to say, well, it's not happening in Boston, it's happening in Providence. Well, Providence is not Boston. There's just very significant, differences in scale and where headquarters are and corporations are. So having, and having said that, you really come back to a couple of issues. The first issue is, where is the leadership and the vision? I don't have an easy plan for this, but we've talked about this before. We're off worrying about the I-195 project. A good project, but then doesn't mean you don't have a vision and you ignore the rest of the city, which has happened. We talk about tax burden. Legislature hasn't done squat to deal with property taxes. Eliminating the tax on motor vehicles is helpful, but it's not an economic development driver.
No. Providence has the 5th highest commercial real estate tax in the country, and it's got to be part of the factor of what some of this value loss is.
But just don't focus on government. Then come back and say, where are the movers and shakers in the private sector? Who's going to see the mayor? Who is going to see the city council? Who are the business leaders? Because the city government can have vision, but the city government is not a business. It can't reinvent downtown.
Right.
And I'm beginning to really question where's the old partnership that existed between the city of Providence and the business community? Where is the business community? I haven't heard anybody in the business community, stand up and raise hell. I haven't seen the business community organize itself and say, boy, Providence is declining faster than it should. It can't be what it was. This is what it needs to be. This is a priority.
Right.
And it gets back to the second most urban state in the country not having an urban strategy. I guess Jersey, in terms of density, is a more urban state. But we're one of the most urban states in the country, and we don't have a strategy for urban economic development. And I'll go back and pointing fingers. So we have the business community not working on this. We have Commerce Rhode Island, giving these grants with any really strategic focus on how you rebuild communities. Of the hundreds of millions of dollars that Commerce Rhode Island spent, 2.9 was some Main Street programs to plant flowers and make things a little more pleasant in some of the urban communities.
Right.
So we're sitting here with a city that's got a broken tax system. We're sitting here with a city that has a changing demographic. It's a poorer city, less of a middle class city. We're sitting here with a business community that is not out there full of piss and vinegar, saying we got to rebuild this downtown and having some vision. We moved the rivers, and Buddy Cianci takes a lot of credit, but also a lot of credit goes to people at the Chamber of Commerce, that Bruce Sunderland, when he was president of the Chamber. These people are not here anymore.
Yeah, no, there's a significant void there. It's also going to be a significant loss of revenue to the city. I mean, these new property owners who are taking over these buildings aren't going to pay the taxes on its valuation at $68 million if they paid $52 million.
And so you got a classified tax structure, and you think you can, when you lose the revenues from the people that you're not taxing fairly to begin with,
right,
the way the classification system works, and you're going to tell the homeowners that we have to increase your taxes? Good luck.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's jump to the governor's race. Always a fun time where 2 weeks and a couple days before, it's a Wednesday primary because of Rosh Hashanah, thanks to Swift reporter Rachel Nunes. I was not aware of that, but it's going to be a Wednesday primary. We've had no debates on either side. We're expecting no functional debates on either side. We've had a lot of debates about the debates, but there's been no airing of people's records. There's no discussion about vision. And I don't think there's a tremendous amount of excitement about either of these races right now coming out of the summer. Have you ever seen anything like it?
Well, ask me that question about 3 weeks from now, because it could change radically.
It absolutely could.
After September 12th. Right now, this is almost like the preliminaries. There are a lot of candidates. It's summer.
There's 8 candidates right now.
Yeah, and so let's see who the Republican and Democrat parties have as their nominees, and let's then judge if there's any vision, leadership, and direction.
Let's go Republicans. Any chance Pat Morgan could beat Alan Fung in the Republican primary?
I don't handicap those things. I have no way of knowing. I can't even get into that.
There's going to be sports betting up at Twin River in a short period of time. You're a Florida State guy. You're not going to be up there voting, betting on the Florida State Clemson game.
All I care about is being in Tallahassee on Labor Day to see us play Virginia Tech. That's one step at a time. You know, Pat, they're both credible candidates. You know, they both have records.
All right, let's jump over the other side. Let's see if you'll feel more comfortable handicapping when you don't have to talk to your Republican friends. Matt Brown, Gina Raimondo. Any chance you could see one of these progressive upsets? We've seen them around the country. They're unexpected. They come out of nowhere, and all of a sudden everybody's scratching their head. And I'll just say, a year ago, it happened here in Rhode Island, 2 years ago, when everybody was predicting Hillary Clinton, who had pounded Barack Obama 8 years earlier in Rhode Island. This was Clinton country in Rhode Island. Bernie Sanders beat her 54.7 to 43%, right, Rachel?
But the difference was this, that Hillary Clinton didn't have any power of incumbency in Rhode Island. And,
but Clintons had power of incumbency.
No,
I push back.
No,
they had owned this state for 20 years.
When I talk about power
politically.
You know, it's doing things for special interest groups.
Okay, Bernie Sanders hadn't either. Bernie Sanders beat her, like, I don't want to say like a drum, but by a pretty good margin.
I'm saying
it was unexpected. Is there any chance Matt Brown upsets Gina Raimondo?
Well, I would be very surprised, because Gina has done a good job keeping Democratic interest groups and constituencies together. It's called network politics, and she has built a network. And the point I was trying to make is you can't compare the ability of a governor or an incumbent in a state to build a network and do favors and pander to people versus a primary for a presidential race. So I'm not sure there's a parallel there. I would be very surprised if Brown, you know, won this thing. The other thing, and let's just be very candid about this thing, money is not the most important thing in the world. You know, President Trump, you know, proved that. But money becomes more important in a small state than in a big state, particularly when there's huge differences in resources and capacity. And politics is about in getting out the vote. And so if you're running a close race,
yeah,
then the party that's most capable of getting out their vote has an advantage. Well, we have one campaign that has $7 million. We have a Democratic Party that has 500 million, a Republican Party that
500,000.
500,000. We have a Republican Party that has a few, you know, tens
$7, $8. What's the Republican Party got?
I don't know what they have.
85 bucks.
But the point was, you need those resources to get out 5 or 6% of your vote, and unless you.
Well, let me throw a little curveball to you. The power structure of Rhode Island wanted to do a deal for the Paw Sox, right? It was Skeffington and Tom Ryan and Terry Murray and Gina Raimondo and Nick Mattiello and the Providence Journal, right? Big heavyweights on one side of the scale. And on the other side, opposing it over the last 2 years was, you know, libertarians and some progressives and a few people over here and maybe GoLocal editorials, and that seemed out of whack. And
well, what was not out of whack was the specter of 38 studios. And so you had a lot of people who were sitting in the state legislature who had to have their arm twisted. You had a specter of Commerce Rhode Island giving out hundreds of
But we'd already voted on 38 studios in elections previous. We'd already had those who voted for 38 studios get reelected in competitive races where their opponents tried to make it. So I'll give that a 5%er. But in the overall scheme of things, we've already vetted 38 studios from an electoral standpoint.
It's easy to say, but if you're running for office in a district in Cranston and Warwick, and you think most of your constituents will oppose to that, you're going to be, you know, very careful. You're not going to want to exercise a profile and courage unless the leadership really pushes you. And you speak about, you know, leadership and process on this thing. You know, it's fine to say the governor was for it, you know, but unless you're willing to use political capital and fight for it, I'm not sure what that means.
Right.
And I didn't see any leadership of political capital coming out of the governor's office. I know that Commerce Rhode Island was helping the Paw Sox, was negotiating with the Paw Sox and helping the city, but I didn't see any political capital coming out of this. And when you had a speaker, for whatever reason, it may have been political, it may have been substantive, I'm not going to try to question its motives, you know, raises a lot of questions, then you have to use that capital to win the fight. and no one felt it was important enough, except the mayor of Pawtucket, to bring the fight to to join the fight.
That poor guy. On a closing note, that poor guy who's lost his hospital and 800 jobs, Gamba Theater, Paw Sox, and looking at trouble on the Hasbro side. Not an easy time to be mayor of an industrial city in Rhode Island.
Well, it's not an easy time to be a mayor of a city in Rhode Island, because a few minutes ago we spoke about the challenges in the city of Providence.
Absolutely.
Capital city. And some of us used to say, you know, as goes Providence, so goes the economic health of the state.
Yep.
Well, you've talked about Pawtucket experiencing fiscal economic stress. You've talked about downtown Providence experiencing economic stress. And that's the vision and the leadership question. Who is going to stand up for an urban strategy? Who is going to stand up and say, no, it's not about I-195 and this cutesy innovation district. It's really about rebuilding our cities or revitalizing our cities. And that takes money, it takes leadership from both the private and the public sectors. And we know we have finite resources, but there's no reason why we don't have fully public and more effective leadership.
Okay, no prediction on the GOP primary, no prediction on the Democrat. Let's go where your comfort zone, Florida State versus Virginia Tech.
I'm not going to jinx this. I don't make predictions.
As sports betting opens up across Rhode Island, he will not be the host of our new sports gambling show. Let's put it that way.
You will never see me. The only thing I can guarantee about this whole conversation is you'll never see me walk into a betting parlor and lay a quarter down.
I want to thank the money man, Gary Sass. As always, we covered it all in this half hour. Coming up in just a moment, Saul Kaplan, back from Ireland. He'll be more innovative with an Irish brogue than we can ever imagine. Here at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. It is Business Monday here at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Thank our friends over at Deepwater Wind for their support. Saul Kaplan is back from Ireland. Are you inspired by Irish innovation?
I'm inspired by a lot of things about Ireland. The trip was fantastic. The country is beautiful. We had a nice mix of it's Dublin in the city and then out in the countryside. It was great. People were great. Clearly, the economy has done well.
Oh, God, booming over there.
We had a driver who told us the unemployment rate was 1.6%. Right? Yeah, we can't even imagine 1.6%.
And by the way, 30 years ago, it was 20%,
No, I know.
15, 20% unemployment.
Yeah, so some pretty good macro policy, right? Corporate tax rates that were favorable. A lot of companies put up facilities there, and a lot of people got work. But great, it was just a great trip, and be able to fly from TF Green.
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
Pretty amazing. So that's pretty cool.
Couldn't be easier to get to Europe than to leave your house, be at the airport, check in, through security, and at your gate in less than an hour.
Oh, it's unbelievable. I said, and reasonably priced. I mean, it's cost me more, and it can take longer to get to Philadelphia. Right?
The train to New York is more expensive if you take the Excel Express.
So good for Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Connection points and people coming in and out. There were a lot of people. I guess I should have known this, but there were a lot of people that were just coming through to get at that flight.
Yeah.
From
absolutely.
wherever they were coming in the country, they flew here and connected up with this flight out of Providence.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I suspect that's what the airport wants.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Through traffic. And
huge opportunity for Rhode Island.
Right.
And couldn't be nicer. While you were away, Elon Musk had another interesting, one of the iconic innovators in America today, heads up, and I don't know how many companies now, solar companies, Tesla,
Space companies.
SpaceX, just about anything he can think of. He's got a major corporation to do it. But the wheels really seem to come off the wagon in a very painful public structure. Last Sunday's New York Times, I think it was Saturday or Sunday, published an interview with him where he seemed to have close to a bit of a nervous breakdown during the course of the interview and exposed his own fragileness, which is complete contrast to his persona the previous 10, 15 years, 20 years. What's your take on that?
Well, there's a lot of interesting things to talk about there. He threw a little bit of a tantrum, didn't he? And whined a little bit about how hard it is, which you don't expect from a CEO.
No.
But in some respects, there was something. I mean, I thought kind of nice about him sharing openly and transparently, in that New York Times article, just how difficult this roller coaster ride is, and he's been on the roller coaster for a very long time. I think he was venting a little bit about frustration for what it means to be in the public markets. And that tweet that he sent out, just throwing out a trial balloon, about taking
you're not allowed to do that. By the way, you're not allowed to do that.
Well, he got in a lot of hot water from his board, from the market, and we'll see. I don't think anything will come of it from the SEC, but it could.
Yeah.
It could. He had to take it back, and he had to come out pretty clearly, and say,
we're not going to take it
after thinking
private.
about this,
Right.
I think we're better off staying public.
A lot of people, I think a week ago Friday, made billions of dollars on selling the stock short.
Sellers, yeah.
And just a significant disruption. Are we getting close to the point, at least in seeing it from a public standpoint, of events in the personal nature and allegations of this and that by rappers staying at his house and all the tweets, and that the board has a fiduciary responsibility at some point to say, maybe we need some day-to-day adult supervision, or maybe we need to make a change in structure.
I don't think it's come to that.
Can you take that level of visionary out of the corporate entity at this fragile state with
I think the
so
board
many
has
factors?
I think the board has a responsibility. I think the board is exercising it. I don't think it's anywhere near that level, but they, in no uncertain terms, came back at Elon, and said, you got to stop doing that, right? This stuff is real. There are SEC regulations that prevent us to do it. This all goes away, by the way. If they get production levels, where they need to be. Right, this all goes away. Right, I mean, this is all about them trying to get to a production level to start to meet demand, and this thing prints cash when they.
So this is on the
that.
new lower price Tesla.
Right.
That's supposed to be $40,000. Right. Hundreds of thousands, certainly tens of thousands,
Backordered.
have put in deposits. cash deposits, and they're missing production schedules by orders of magnitude. They're hundreds of thousands of units behind, and de facto years behind of what their estimated
Well, they're
production
doing
schedule.
better. If there was a time there where you could question whether they were ever going to get there. They started to improve. They did a lot of workarounds, tents, production lines under tents and things like that. I think it's improving, and the demand has held pretty solid for these cars.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of this conversation settles down when they can get production levels up, start to fulfill demand. This is all about not wanting to go back to the public stock market again, right? Because they're burning a lot of cash,
Yeah.
right? And they start to become cash flow positive and show a profit when they can get to production levels. The demand, as long as the demand stays there, I think the fundamentals of this thing are still there to deserve a pretty good multiple, whether it's at $420 a share that he was talking about, taking it private at or not. But I think the markets there, the short sellers will obviously be there nipping at his heels.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think that's going
Thursday
away.
or Friday, there was a Forbes Business Insider story that Apple was raiding talent from Tesla at record pace because of the lack of stability. At some point, does that catches up with you? You get unstable.
that's right.
Smart people say, I'm not up for this ride.
No, it has to be credible. You have
right.
to believe if you're going to invest a chunk of your career, and a lot is riding on making these production levels and fulfilling this demand, then you got to believe that it could happen, or why would you go there, right? You want to be part of an exciting initiative like Tesla. You believe in the product and what they're trying to do. It's good for the planet. The cars are crazy cool.
Yeah.
I think this lower price point car allows mere mortals, to be able to afford this
cool.
car,
Right.
and they just have to pump them out off the manufacturing line. The war on talent is real, though. All these big tech platforms and companies, they're going to take advantage of everything they see in the marketplace, to get at the talent they need to grow. And you could argue that the barrier isn't capital. The barrier is talent.
Yeah.
And the ability to scale these things.
Let's jump over. There were probably two global things that were going on last week. One, the smoke from the wildfires in the West, and then the number of curse words voiced on Route 195 coming into Providence.
I heard them all the way in Ireland. I think
Yes, both of them had international impact,
Yeah.
one relative to pollution, air pollution, the other to one's hearing. How does... In this time, how can a major governmental function, miscalculate so badly about what the implications of something is going to be? It seems a little strange.
Well, I mean, that they got the model so wrong about what the,
So completely
to
wrong.
predict what the traffic is going.
Absolutely.
So they've made some changes. I'm assuming they made some changes
Last night.
in the layout of the construction work,
Right.
which will probably stretch out the time. It'll probably add some costs to the thing. But this thing got so heated, and people were so outraged. I mean, leave it to Rhode Islanders, right? If it's not a snowstorm, at least you can't control that.
Well,
But this
I
is
think
something
there's-
we can. This is
Right.
a project
This is
that we
a-
need to take on.
Right, self-inflicted, and in addition, this wasn't adding 5 or 10% to people's commute in time. This
Right.
was multiplying by 200, 300, 400.
Yeah.
As I mentioned with Gary, driving out 195 at 10:30 on Friday morning to head down to Newport for an event. And it was still backed up 3 miles beyond Seekonk at 10:30 in the morning on a Friday in the summer.
No, it's amazing.
So
No, and Rhode Islanders aren't going to put up with that for
No.
a year and a half, no matter how bad the bridge is done. It needs repair. So
Right.
you're going to need another model, and you're going to need to stretch out the construction. It's still going to be inconvenient. There's still going to be a lot of pain. People are going to peel off. They're going to either change their work patterns if they can, some people probably were even going up to 24 and coming around the back way,
Oh, they're
and coming
trying
back in
everything.
that
Yeah,
way.
absolutely.
People do anything to get around traffic, but there's nothing that gets people angrier than being stuck in traffic. And our traffic is not bad compared to a lot of other places in the country. It's one of the advantages of living here. You go out to a major city, you're in LA,
Right.
or you're in New York,
Boston.
or you're in Boston. We have it good here. So let's keep it in perspective. But I'm glad that they were looking at the workarounds, because it's just not sustainable, given some of the things that I read.
But does it seem perplexing that you could miscalculate by so much? I mean,
Well, they do the best they can. I mean, it's a simulation model.
Right.
I'm sure they have software to be able to do it. And they do the best they can to project, what will happen to traffic patterns. I mean, they have the traffic data.
But don't they have the 2 jars and the jelly beans, right? I mean, if you close off the mouth of one of the jars, then a lot of jelly beans are going to spill. I mean,
you don't need to be.
I don't know. This just doesn't seem that complicated.
You don't think it's a linear programming challenge?
They closed off 40% of the access points. That's going to have a problem.
Yeah, and it did. And it did. Yeah, there's no question about that. And it's hot, and tempers are flaring,
and it's in the summer where people are on vacation. Wait
Right.
till back to school.
This week,
functionally
next
this
week.
next week, going forward.
Yeah.
And also have you now stained DOT and to some part the governor, which is every backup now on 195 forevermore for the next 24 months is going to be blamed on this
I'm just using
miscalculation.
it as a standing. I mean, I'm fortunate to live here in Providence, not on the East Bay, so I don't have to deal with that. And now I have a built-in excuse not to go out to Seacon. To have to go out and shop at the. Like, not going there.
It's created a lot of excuses for everyone for being late to meetings. I was getting my hair cut across the street at the arcade. I blamed it on the traffic on 195.
Hey, another thing. I mean, since I've been away, it seems like you were successful at getting rid of the scooters. It looks like you got the paw socks out of town. Like, what are you working on now? The Fane Tower? Like, what's the matter with you?
We are pro Fane Tower from an editorial standpoint.
Oh, okay.
We have voiced strong support for the Fane Tower. The bird scooters are nowhere to be seen.
They're gone. Well, they left in a big hurry. So
left
isn't
in a
that
very
great?
big
And
hurry.
a lot of people are like cheering, but what about the people who could benefit from that kind of transportation? Here's an example, just as we talked, right? Like, to try to work something out, to do some experiments, to see what works. Instead, what they did is they unilaterally put out, some regs. And the folks from Bird must have looked at it and said, like, we're out of here. Pick up your scooters and go.
Wait,
right?
the unilateralness was they showed up on a Friday unannounced.
They didn't do it right.
And dumped it out.
But
on
you
the
think we did
street.
it right?
No, not at
Like,
all.
by promulgating regulations where they said, that's fine, we're out of here.
Right.
It's too small a market, right? Like, they're not here because we have 18 million people here, right? They're here, because there's enough density in the city.
You don't think
right?
they'll be back?
What?
You don't
Oh,
think
I
they'll
don't
be-
know. I have no insight into whether it'll be back, but this is what happens, when you try to stop innovators, without a thoughtful regulatory process, right? Yeah, you can put rules up there that nobody else, step up to, but that isn't what we really want. What we really want is to open up transportation options, for the people that live here, and we should have that mindset, don't you think?
100%, but there is some on the reckless side, right?
No.
Lack of enforcement thing. I mean, we don't put machetes out on the street and say dispute resolution tools.
I'm not arguing for no regulation. What I argue for is smarter regulation that's more flexible, that's more receptive to new approaches, right? Than one-size-fits-all regulatory. I think that's driven, mostly by lobbying from incumbents that are threatened by these new modes of transportation or new business models or new technologies, and they use the excuse of it's not good for public safety, it's not good for congestion in the streets. But the truth is, those things are gone now. So okay, so it's less likely that someone's going to get hurt by one, but it's also now there's one less option, for some young folks who I think we're
I think on
starting
our
to enjoy.
conversation with them most recently, their comments were that they were in the process of complying with
Yeah,
the
could
new
be.
regulatory structures, and they have some hurdles. They have to number
Yep.
their vehicles.
I don't
and
think the big
things
companies
like
are
that.
going away. I don't think Uber's going away from
No.
bikes and motorized bike. I mean, they're going to look at every mode of transportation for different pockets of the population. And yeah, they're going to have to work with municipalities and regulators, to make sure that we have really good regulations that are about public safety and the citizens' interest, not just the interest of incumbent companies.
So you will no longer be able to take your bird scooter down to the new Pawsox Stadium.
They did in my office, by the way. Like one day I went there, and I think I
Did you
shot
ride
you a
it?
picture.
You did.
Right.
You sent me
and
one.
there's one
Texted
sitting
me.
outside in Olneyville, outside of Biff. And then when I talked to our team about it, they started telling me how they were using it, just to try it out,
Yeah.
and see how they get there. They
Did you
thought
use
that-
one?
They thought the business. I didn't. I'm too old. I couldn't be
There's-
trusted.
There's no age restriction on
I
that.
couldn't be trusted.
We are now almost 3 weeks exactly
know.
away from Biff.
I know.
Everyone's it's all locked in, right?
It's,
we have
lo-
all
it's,
our
it's locked and loaded.
we have all our
now.
presenters,
The numbers,
storytellers.
It's going to sell out. We're filling in the remaining seats and giving out the remaining scholarships. We want to make sure that we have a lot of students there. It's really important to us that we have youth there. I mean, these are folks who have the biggest stake in our future,
Yep.
and we don't invite them to the conversation. So we put youth on our stage, and we put a lot of youth in that theater, and we purposely want them to collide and connect and collaborate with a lot of the adults that are trying to imagine new ways to solve these important social challenges that we face. Yeah, we're getting excited. 3 weeks out, all coming together. I look forward to it every year. Two of the most inspiring days every year, and you can the energy starts to show up. You start to see the hashtag on Twitter, like how many events do you know? That a month before the event, you can start to see the conversation of people from around the world that are coming to this thing. So we get excited about it.
Let's talk a little bit about it. Tell us about somebody who is a well-known superstar. Give me a
Well,
little-
on the same topic of putting youth
Yeah.
on the stage, we just nailed down the arrangements. A 16-year-old high school student, Royce Mann, is a student activist. He's had several of his spoken word poems go viral online, and I've met him. He's incredible. You would not believe that this kid is 16 years old and speaking to power and speaking to adults in ways that you just have to pay attention to. He's amazing, and we just nailed down his mom's going to come with him here to Providence.
Where are they coming in from?
They're in Colorado. And they're going to come for the event and mark this down. Royce Mann, even if you can't be in the theater with us, we're going to live stream it. You want to, when we release the schedule of what time different storytellers are going to share their stories, that's when you're going to want to watch.
Yeah, great. And any surprises from the usual formula? Will there be anything different? Will it still be hot dogs at lunch on that first day?
I try to stay out of the details of what we're going to have for lunch and focus on the conditions for what we call random collisions of unusual suspects. So I don't know what we're having for lunch. I think it'll be good. It is every year. There's so much conversation going on over lunch. It's always lunch is always amazing. I mean, I never take the time to actually eat it anyway. Yeah, it's going to be a special thing. We fill up Trinity Rep. Hopefully the weather will be nice for us, but we tent that
Right.
space just outside of there. And over the course of the 2 days, the chemistry level amongst the folks from Rhode Island and from around the country, even from the world. Somebody signed up the other day from New Zealand. And I'm looking at it like, how does that even happen?
Yeah,
like,
right.
that somebody finds this event here in Providence from New
Well, it's
Zealand.
gotten a fair amount of press in the past couple of
and
years.
makes the trip. Yeah, I mean, we do our best to put the word out there.
Well, we got Forbes Loves this
Yeah,
year as one of the top meetings in
that
the
helps.
country. And the year before, I think Inc. magazine named it one of the
That's
top business innovation meetings. From your trip, and just tie it back together before we end.
Yep.
What was it about Ireland? Ireland right now, from my experience, is this collision of two different worlds going on. This almost ancient land of agriculture and meadows and tiny country roads, and then you go into a Dublin or a Limerick, and there's literally cranes absolutely almost working every square inch of the city, building some new financial service
everywhere we are.
headquarters, tied to Brexit, but also technology, Facebook, Google, Cisco, they're all there with major presence. What could we learn here from Ireland and what's going on
Well,
there?
I think the importance of community really came across to me. We traveled, we're there 4 days. We traveled, not the whole country, but we got a sense of it. Every single town we went to was sweeter than the one before.
Yeah, right.
Every single one. I mean, the homes were well kept, right? Not huge,
No.
but beautiful and well kept. And the center of town was postcard pretty and
Yeah.
beautiful. And a lot of these towns aren't tourist attractions. They just take great pride in their community, and you can tell that they do. Now, they've had the benefit, when you have a national unemployment rate of 1.6, anybody who wants to find work, can find work, right? And so that helps. But still, I think the great care that is taken there in those local towns and communities, and great pride that people have for that. And everywhere we went, people were friendly. I just learned, so much about the history of the place, which is interesting in its own right. But modern day Ireland is something to see, and the beauty is breathtaking.
It's absolutely
as you
beautiful.
travel around.
One other interesting thing there versus here, in rural areas here, we're getting this big pushback on renewable energy
Yep.
opportunities in their communities, solar and
Yep.
wind. You go out in Ireland, there's wind.
I
There's
saw
wind
wind
turbines
everywhere.
absolutely everywhere.
And they fit beautifully
And
into the
they-
landscape.
absolutely.
And you didn't look at that and say, oh, look, they've industrialized the place.
No.
They have wind turbines. They were beautiful,
Right.
And you want to say, why did it take us so long? Why is it taking us so long to move more quickly to these alternative forms of sustainable energy? Europe has been way ahead of us. And so a lot of the technology, right, a lot of the technology to drive those things comes from Northern Europe.
Absolutely.
Right? Certainly on the offshore side, comes from Northern Europe and gets brought here, and we're using it here off the coast here. Deepwater
It's
and others.
interesting,
Yep.
as you know, they've had a big drought over there
Yep.
this summer, and because of the weather pattern, wind energy has not performed as it usually is estimated to, but the solar has outperformed
Oh, really?
what it's estimated to do, and more than offset what the implications of the decreased wind production. So an interesting balancing of the two different renewable mixes over there and the implications of it. Gary talked a little bit about the lack of firm, forward-thinking leadership articulating vision in Rhode Island, and not just saying that it's the responsibility only of the governor or putting on anyone, the lack of business community, nonprofit community, etc. And I think that's where there is a little suffering right now, that no one's coming forward. I think people know it, but they don't want to get the backlash of NIMBYism, so they sort of whisper renewables are a good idea rather than pushing
this
forward.
This is the Rhode Island way, isn't it?
Right.
Like, instead of having the real conversation, looking at the trade-offs of some of these policies, actually coming up with a policy, that works for the whole state. The whole thing's 1,000 square miles, for heaven's
Right.
sakes. Instead of 38 cities in town. Policy. 39 cities and towns. Coming up, organically. Right. We don't take advantage of our small size with clear policies, and energy is one of those areas. I think we've made some progress. Goes back several administrations.
Absolutely.
I think we've been on it. I'm always proud when I see the offshore wind. I think the costs will start to come down, and it'll become
seeing it
more
already come down.
economical. I hope we get more of the back end, jobs that come from that.
Yeah.
As these things start to take off up and down the shore, but also on land where it makes sense to
I
do.
believe it's a Forbes piece last week, more jobs now in renewable than on fossil fuel
Oh, I believe it.
here in America.
Oh, I believe it.
With that, Mr. Innovation, thanks so much. We're gearing up. The countdown to BIF is on. It'll be September 13th and 14th at Trinity. If you have not bought tickets yet, you've got very limited few days to do so, and you cannot buy them via Amazon Prime. You cannot buy them there. You've got to go to the Business Innovation Factory website, and they'll deliver them even faster than Amazon Prime. Thank you as always.
My
Thank
pleasure.
everybody for tuning in. Tomorrow, back-to-back, Rachel Nunes, Kate Nagel, 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock. Lots of lifestyle, lots of government and politics. Thank everybody at Deepwater, and thank you for tuning in to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. We'll see you tomorrow.